Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to IPDay's Webinar Wednesday, Active Learning in the Adult Classroom, Part 2. June Roll, our IPDay director, is on, and I am your facilitator, Jenna Moniz. And since we are on Part 2 of Active Learning in the Adult Classroom, we're just going to jump right into our content today. Again, my name is Jenna Moniz, and I'm the Department Chair for Pre-College Academic Studies at Atlantic Technical College, which is located in Broward County, somewhere between Miami and Palm Beach County. So glad to be with everyone today. Just a quick reminder here, as we remind you just about every webinar Wednesday, of our very important curriculum frameworks that you can find on the Florida Department of Education website. Critical in that these are our learning standards, these are our learning goals, this is what we teach to. We don't teach to books, we teach to standards, and these are our standards for adult ed, all of which are updated to and aligned with the CCR standards, save for ESOL that are in the works right now and will be aligned to the CCR standards shortly. Just a quick few housekeeping things to remember. We have our Q&A box up in the top of your screen, so if at any point you would like to jump in, ask a question, clarify anything, remind me to slow down, please feel free to. My feelings won't be hurt. There's a lot to cover today, so I'm going to do my best not to talk too quickly, as are one of our important strategies that we'll talk about and we have been talking about. But again, feel free to jump into the Q&A box, and if you have any questions, type them there, and we'll be sure to respond to you. You are in listen mode right now, and this is being recorded. Our webinar is being recorded. The recording session will be live in about a day or two, but so you know, today's presentation, the PowerPoint, and a document that we will be working on are loaded into the IPDay archives. So please do feel free to take a moment right now and download either of those. As much as possible, we would like to make this session active and engaging and interactive. So it's a great opportunity to download those, take notes. If you have questions that you want to ask or something that you'd like to remember, it's a great way to also get you interacting while you're listening to the webinar as well. Today we're going to talk more about our learning channels. Last webinar, round 1 of active learning strategies, we talked about input through listening and reading, and today we're going to continue on and talk about more the productive language. So again, we're going to talk about speaking and writing today, and while these are all, intertwined and connected, listening, speaking, reading, writing are all interconnected. Last round, we focused on the receptive end, which had a lot to do with listening and reading, how information comes in. Today, we're going to focus on processing information once that information is in, and then output, students speaking and writing in classes in the adult ed classroom. So what is active learning? Active learning is just what it sounds like. It's learning that is experiential. It is hands-on learning. It is learning by doing versus passive learning. So this is asking students to be participants in the learning and not just passive receptors. So we will talk much more about what that looks like and how we can get students increasingly to the level of independence and what we can do to make each of those processes better for our students. So some of the roadblocks that we sometimes hear in the adult ed classroom with regard to active learning and what makes active learning difficult sometimes have to do with the size of our classes, the fact that we have very little prep time, we get that. And also I've heard feedback about, teachers and, the fact that we are so passionate about what we do and have so many objectives that we want to meet that it's difficult for us to let go some of the controls in the classroom and let the students become more of the engagers, the actors, and we take more of a facilitator role. And then of course there's the adult ed picture that some of us may think of when we think of adult ed classrooms, which have to do with prescription and individualized instruction and students coming in and having a prescriptive packet, which also has its place in time. But we're going to talk today more about balancing and how we can make sure that there's a nice even balance of all of that in our classrooms. So here's a quick visual we looked at last round, which have to do with receptive and productive language. So information coming in and information going out, right? So listening and reading are one of the main ways that information comes in. And we talked a lot about that last round. Today we're going to talk more about the speaking and writing as information comes out, when we are able to see what students are able to then produce. But again, this is not necessarily a linear process. These are all interconnected. They're all interwoven. So, we will see that, obviously, if there's a listening activity, somebody's doing the speaking, and vice versa. So we're going to talk about how these all intertwine and interconnect, and again, back to the balance. So this is something that some of you may recognize if you are familiar with Marzano and Marzano's framework. And some of us, when we just by hearing the word Marzano can get a little bit maybe uneasy because we tend to think about the evaluative side of it. But taking a step away from the evaluation piece and just looking at the framework in the heart of what it actually is and what it actually means, we're able to see that everything that we're talking about today and that we talked about last round has a way of overlaying and overlapping, overlaying with Marzano's frameworks. So you see here that this is what you will see with regard to interacting with new information coming in. In other words, input. So kind of what we're doing today is talking about some of this in layman's terms. Well, what does it look like in real life? And I think in a lot of ways, we stand back and we say, well, I do this. This is not necessarily something new to me, but it's nice to sometimes step away from it and look at it from a reflective end and look at seeing the way that we show up in our classrooms and in education and honing our craft from there. So we talked about information coming in, reflecting on learning, note-taking strategies, and organizing students for new information. We're going to talk a little bit about processing information once that information, comes in. And when we say new information, we're talking about new content, whether that content be in an ESOL classroom, whether you're in an ABE classroom, a GED classroom, or in an integrated classroom. So we're talking much more about integrating our classrooms and fast-tracking students so that they may be concurrently enrolled or in an integrated program that is both adult education and CTE education. So we're going to talk about how a lot of that content, or again, new information coming in, can best be processed. And so here's what it looks like with regard to Marzano's framework. Again, we're breaking it down into layman's terms. And this is just another way to look at input, process, and output. And if you're familiar with differentiated instruction or Carol Ann Tomlinson's frameworks, it's very similar. We talked a little bit last round about brain plasticity, which in a nutshell means that our brains have amazing capacity to learn. In fact, somewhere in the billions, even potential of trillion connections, neural connections can be made in one human brain. So what this means is, doesn't matter what the age of our students are, a healthy brain can continue to learn, can continue to grow. What we do see sometimes in adult education is that a lot of the wiring, because when students learn, when we learn, it actually biologically, physiologically shows up and gets written into the brain. So, and this is a picture actually of what it kind of looks like. So a lot of our students who have come to us from backgrounds of maybe not as positive as we would have liked it, come to us with a lot of baggage, come to us with having felt like they've failed in the past, not only have new learning to do, new brain writing or neural writing, but rewriting. So a lot of our students are having to rewrite a lot of that neural foundation or those neural branchings that have been set up because they've been told or come to believe that they are not smart, that they are failures. So a lot of what we are doing is rewriting, which goes hand in hand and is connected very closely to our environment, our learning environments. So emotions and the emotional state of our classrooms are critical. And in most of our adult ed classrooms, we find our rooms to be inviting and places where students are comfortable taking risks and comfortable speaking, and it may be for the first time in a long time that they feel like they can step out of their comfort zones and actually expose themselves. But sometimes these things happen without us noticing, without us even having the intention of making the environment not as safe. For example, in all good intent, we will often call on a student to respond to a question. And if that student is not ready, that can put that student into a state of anxiety. And we don't necessarily think of nervousness or anxiety as fear, but it absolutely is. And what we see in the human brain is that repeatedly, day after day of feeling and being in a state of anxiousness, nervousness, being afraid that you'll be embarrassed in class, maybe afraid that you'll be called on. And again, our students have, in many cases, lives that are so full of issues that may be larger than we could even fathom. So a lot of our students are coming to us with a lot of life happening. So they may be in a place of survival mode, in a place where that stress is just ongoing in and outside of our classroom. So we want to make sure that our classrooms are as comfortable a place as possible for students, because if not, chemicals in the brain, including cortisol, adrenaline, epinephrine, that after repeated periods of time can cause some real physical damage. As we know, there's more talk about the damage that stress does to the body. But we know that in the classroom, what literally happens is learning can't happen when a student is under stress. Literally, the neurons, the neural synapses cannot make connections because the student is in a state of flight or fight or fight or flight. Where on the flip side, if a student is, engaged and it's a safe environment and we've set it up so that emotion is played upon in a positive way, the absolute reverse happens. And positive emotions can actually, help a student not only to fire, meaning remember something more quickly, but transfer that learning onto something else. So positive emotions are biologically, physiologically critical. So toward the bottom, what you see on the screen is flow, eustress, and I+1. And some of you may be familiar with some of this terminology. Basically, this is the state that we want our students to be in. We want our students to be in a place of challenge, but comfortable challenge. Comfortable to step out of their comfort zones, but not so much that they're afraid, that it's anxiety producing. So challenging, inquiry mode, a student is in a place of ready to push themselves is exactly where we want them to be. We talked a little bit about learning styles. We talked about multiple intelligences a bit. If you haven't had a chance to give yourself an inventory to check out your own multiple intelligences profile, I highly recommend that you do. And not only that, if you can also allow your students to do their profiles, it is amazingly empowering for a lot of reasons. For one, most of our assessments only test verbal linguistic and logical mathematical intelligences. And according to Howard Gardner out of Harvard University, his theory states that, well, sure, verbal linguistics and logical mathematical intelligences absolutely are legitimate intelligences, but they're not the only one. So allowing our students to see themselves as intelligent in other ways is hugely empowering and can be transferred over to other examples. For example, we would tend to think of someone who is a great athlete as, oh, he or she has a good skill, versus bodily kinesthetic intelligence, or someone that is a people person. Oh, well, she's good with people, he's good with people, versus really looking at that as interpersonal intelligence. So imagine how empowering it is for a student to say, well, you know, my math scores may not be as high as they could be, but my interpersonal intelligence is very high. Not only is a motivator and, you know, something that really can play into a student's confidence, but it allows the student to say, while my mathematical intelligence isn't as high as it could be right now, by paying closer attention to it and putting more practice into it, that this is something that I can choose to actively become stronger at. So I highly encourage you, if you haven't already taken a multiple intelligence profile, to do so, and to give this to students as an activity. We will share a profile toward the end, so you'll have some examples of certain multiple intelligence profiles that I recommend, but you can easily go online and Google it and find a number yourself. We talked a lot about VAKs last round. We won't do so much this time, but just take a look at the chart on the side, the list of VAK, VKA, KAV. So, and I know VAK and visual auditory kinesthetic is not necessarily new to anyone out there, but just taking another look at reflecting upon the ways that the channels of information, the ways that information come in. Information comes in through, you know, us seeing it, through us hearing it, through us experiencing it, touching it. And a healthy person, a healthy brain uses all three. We may, however, have preferences toward a certain setup. So I, for example, am KAV, highly kinesthetic, then auditory, then visual. So just take a look at the list on the side, tag yourself. You probably know yourself well enough by now to know kind of what your setup is, if you're AKV or VAK or AVK. And again, these are just preferences, and we all learn through each one. Bottom line is, the more that we use, the more learning channels that we use, and the more learning channels that we allow our students to use, the easier it is for them not only to remember it, but transfer information. And again, I love this quote by Bill McBride, who actually presented not too long ago at our ACE conference. He says that we teachers tend to teach to our own brains, which, you know, is only natural. We teach to our learning preferences for the most part. So it's also important that we as educators step outside of our own comfort zones and offer a variety of ways for students to learn, not just the way that we are comfortable learning. So let's talk a little bit about talking. Let's talk a little bit about speaking. We talked last round about information coming in through input. Now we're going to talk about information going out through speaking and writing. So just like last round when we discussed the importance of, as educators, as teachers, and how we show up with regard to our speech in classrooms, it's important that we explicitly share that with our students. So public speaking happens to be one of the activities that is the most frightening for so many people. In fact, at one point I heard there was a poll out there that asked folks, are they more afraid of public speaking or more afraid of death? And people didn't automatically say more afraid of death. Public speaking can be very frightening for not only ourselves, but for students as well. So, you know, obviously, you know, when I think about that, some of the things that come to mind are, well, unless I know that a student is completely ready to get up in front of the entire classroom and speak, we would get to the point that we scaffold little by little, and we're going to talk more about that, little by little, to getting that student ready to present. I wouldn't just say, you know, okay, let's popcorn, let's go around, and now it's your turn, and now you get up in front of the classroom, because again, that goes back to what we were talking about with regard to emotion and students being anxious. So in the same way that it's important for us to follow all of these kind of reminders regarding speech, it's important for us to remind our students of the same. So when we talk about setting students up for public speaking or even for small group work, we want to remind them of their speech patterns. We want to remind them of the way that they are speaking. Are they enunciating? Are they clearly enunciating? Are they using concise language? Are they watching their fillers, those nervous words that pop in? Are they paraphrasing? So if their partner or the rest of the class doesn't necessarily understand what they say or get what they say, are they able to paraphrase it, say it in a different way versus just reading it off of a paper? And again, communication is the goal. Many of us in Florida, many of us have English learners in our room, no matter what roster or classroom they may be registered in, anywhere from ESOL to GED, AAAE, ABE classes. Many of us have English learners. And pronunciation may or may not be a focus for them. I think it's important to remind students it's okay, your accent, quote unquote accent, doesn't have to be necessarily native English accent. Communication is the goal. If you're able to communicate your goals, then that's what's most important. Last round, we took a second to take a peek at a video that was presented by Mr. Biffle, Chris Biffle, who is the director of Whole Brain Teaching. And we focused on a strategy that had to do with speaking, listening, and movement. So it combined all of the VAK strategies into one quick strategy, which was a basic turn to your partner and paraphrase or teach your partner what you just learned. In addition to that, I want to be able to see you use your hands, allow yourself, let your body to get into it. So they use gestures so that the body would also remember it and made it clear for each partner. Now, Chris Biffle can be, somewhat excitable, but the strategy itself remains the same. You don't have to do the strategy in the same way that Chris does. You don't have to get super excited and do the class yes. The important thing, the important takeaway from the strategy is that students are speaking, they're engaging, and they are reteaching what they just learned. And we saw how multiple parts of the brain get involved when a student engages in that activity called Teach OK. So if you didn't have a chance to see that, Google it, Teach OK. You will see a lot of K-12 examples, but know that this absolutely can be done at the adult level. You don't have to be, again, as excited about it or as excitable about it. Again, the idea remains the same, that they are engaging, they're talking to one another, and they are teaching. They are the ones doing the teaching. So we're going to talk much more about balance and the importance of balance in the classroom, right? So we think of our classroom, we think of whole group instruction, flexible groups, and independent instruction. And I think in the adult ed classroom, we're really, really good at whole group instruction and really, really good at independent instruction. In other words, we may be very comfortable teaching the entire class. Okay, folks, I'm the instructor and here's the information. And we may be really comfortable teaching independent students one-to-one. I think it's that in-between ground, the flexible grouping where it's a matter of getting outside of our own comfort zones into more comfort with letting students work together in strategic groups. So versus hey, you guys are sitting at the same table, you guys are a group, strategically placing students together for purposeful reasons and allowing for that balance. If we're teaching whole group all the time, or if we're teaching independently all the time and don't allow for the flexible grouping in the middle, then we're lacking the balance that we need to see happening in classrooms. And we're lacking the activity, the active, engaged learning that we need to see. And again, this goes back to the strategy, the Teach OK strategy, and any other strategy that allows students to be the ones reteaching or teaching the information that they just learned. You all have seen this. Bottom line, when we are the ones lecturing, when we are the ones talking, when we are the ones who are the experts, students retain much less. When the students are the experts and they're the ones teaching, they retain far, far more. So let's talk about what that looks like, because again, it's not a matter of just throwing a brand new student in front of the classroom and saying, hey, you're on, time to present. how can we get our students to the place where they are gradually more comfortable, not only with public speaking and presenting, but at the cognitively complex levels that their college level curriculum and their technical program curriculum is going to demand of them. So little by little, working together, working as a team, we see that we can build student skills. So when we talk about gradual release of responsibility, we're talking about scaffolding students to the place where they can do it on their own. It's important too, especially with the new standards that have come out, the new Common Core, whatever we call them, the college readiness standards. At one point before it was political suicide to say Common Core, that's where these standards were born. No matter what we call them, the idea was that we are getting students ready for the future. We are getting students ready to problem solve. In other words, the days of remembering and regurgitating facts and figures aren't necessarily what's most important these days. We need students to be able to think critically and work together collaboratively and solve problems together. So we're talking about teaching problem-solving skills and being able to communicate with one another. And I think that with the more that students and that we are attached to our cell phones and social media, and students are more comfortable just texting one another versus having real conversations, the less they're comfortable coordinating, collaborating, working together collaboratively. And it's important that we teach students how to sit together, make eye contact, and figure out problems together. Really what we're asking students to do and what students need to prepare for are to be able to figure out the problems of the future that we may not even know exist yet and innovate solutions to them. So it's important that we strategically get them together to talk through problems and figure out things together. So with regard to gradual release, and we sometimes refer to it as the I do, we do, you do process. This is one way to look at it. So if you see the teacher column toward the left, there's direct instruction, and that is, again, that whole group, the teacher as the expert, and that, which is absolutely critical during certain periods of the lesson. So this is the phase of the lesson where the teacher is perhaps disseminating information, getting students set up, and it could look like providing instruction, setting goals, modeling, thinking aloud, and that thinking aloud could sound like the kinds of questions you would ask yourself when you're trying to solve a problem, when you're trying to figure something out, when you're not giving up and you're saying, okay, well, if it didn't work that way, let me try another way. Thinking aloud through those kinds of processes is hugely important and powerful for students to hear so that they can mirror that. And then again, we get students together to work work interactively through instruction. And that could look like a lot of things, but again, they're working together as a group, and gradually, little by little, you're releasing the whole so that they are able to do that, each of the skills independently. The CCR standards are asking for students to be able to perform these skills and tasks independently. Well, we can't just throw them into the deep end on their own at the beginning. How do we get them to the point that they are little by little more and more ready to do it, to do each task or complete each task independently? So this is another way to look at it, the teacher responsibility versus the student responsibility through gradual release. So the I do might be your direct instruction, the we do, guided instruction, more and more into the facilitator role. And you see toward the bottom of the teacher responsibility triangle, toward the end where the student is doing it on his or her own, the teacher's responsibility at that point is very little. Teacher may be walking around facilitating, troubleshooting, providing materials, asking if any students need any support or help. But again, this is a balance. This may be time that you're meeting with students one-to-one while the rest of the class is working independently. So again, balance. And yet another way to look at gradual release. And this visual is important in that it reminds us that, it's a process. This is a cycle. It's not necessarily linear. I will always in this order, I do, we do, you do, but that they're interchangeable. It's more of a cycle. So what I wanted to point out here is, and this is a tool that we will share, this is out of Broward County, and while it says ESOL Instructional Strategies Matrix, this is a chart that we have found it is useful and can be used for just about any student because it has to do with universal design for learning. So it provides variety and some great ideas. And what we have highlighted here are some ideas for collaboration and conversation. So just, some ways that you can get students together engaged in talking about instruction. And again, we will share this template with you. It's a great way, just kind of a cheat sheet, a menu of interactive strategies that you can put into place. And we'll talk a little bit about writing. So writing is an area, as probably no news to any of you. Many of our students, maybe second to math, I don't know, math is up there in terms of the level of anxiety around it. When it comes to writing, our students can be so frightened to put their pens to paper or their fingers to keyboard these days. And it's easy to understand why. It's total exposure. It's, there's no way around it. It's blank paper, blank essay. We're asking you to share what you know or what you think. And it's not a closed activity where you can just drop words in. This is total exposure. So how do we get the student to the place where that exposure is more and more comfortable for the student so that when they leave us with their high school diplomas or having completed ABE or having completed ESOL, they get to the next level. And we hope that there is a post-secondary level from them as their next step, that they show up ready and confident, not only to speak with confidence, but able to write and to demonstrate who they are, what they believe, in a way that is strong. Vocabulary tends to be an issue for many students. Because there's not as the level of exposure that needs to happen. So if your students aren't strong readers, don't come to you as strong readers, and most of our students do not. It's important to get them not only to enjoy reading, but to explicitly take in vocabulary, new vocabulary that we know that they're going to need at our levels at the post-secondary level. So vocabulary is absolutely key. And we talk a lot about the different kinds of vocabulary. Tier 1 vocabulary words are your everyday speech, the kinds of words that a student is going to acquire, to pick up, to use, on their own. This isn't necessarily the area for most classes that we have to spend so much time in. It's really the Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas that we need to put extreme focus in order to prepare them for the next level. So your Tier 2 vocabulary words, that's your academic language. These are words that they're probably going to see across the board no matter what the subject is, and words that we need to strategically focus in on and teach. In addition to Tier 3 vocabulary words, which are domain specific, which you will probably see especially if a student is moving into a career pathway, a technical program, working toward a technical certification or at the college level. We want to be able to expose students to the vocabulary that they're going to need at the next level right away. It's too late if they're waiting to learn that vocabulary once they've entered that CTE career and technical program or college program, because those programs move so quickly, so fast, that they're going to need to have some of that front-loaded before they even get to that place. So our instruction in our classrooms, and we talk a lot about making sure that we're teaching to the careers. We want to make sure that we're exposing students to the specific vocabulary that they're going to need at the next level. And with regard to technical vocabulary and academic vocabulary, a lot of it goes back to our Greek and Latin cognates. So the more that we can teach students cognates, pieces of words that we know that they're going to see across the board, the more prepared they will be for the next level. And this is the kind of vocabulary that we want to start exposing students to. So, might look like something that's really complex, but I would argue that you could share this at, at just about any level. We visited a school not too long ago where we saw something very similar to this being taught at level 2, level 1 ESOL classes. Now, the vocabulary and the conversation around it may be consolidated into a place where it's more accessible. But there's no reason why we can't start exposing students to this kind of vocabulary early on. Now, certainly we're going to see this in the upper level, in GED level math classes, but there's no reason why we can't start having these conversations in the ESOL classes and at the ABE level classes. This is real world instruction. These are real world activities. This is something that, if we're asking students, well, you're at home, you want to put together a picnic table outside, how can we do that? So you can see that there are so many different skills and so many different intelligences, really, that are being asked of students to pull from here. This can be an across-the-board subject content lesson. Not only is the math vocabulary pulled in here, but this could be, an activity that you really physically, literally have students doing, and it may not be with actual wood, but you can do it with, with paper. This is a great resource, Quizlet.com. You can set up a free account for this, and it's really great in that you're able to build flashcards. There are quizzes in there that students can do, interactive matching activities. The great thing about it is it's hands-on and students are actually doing. It's not asking them just to sit there and listen passively. They're actually hands-on and doing. And I love that it also has a piece where students can actually hear what certain vocabulary words sound like before they actually take a stab at it. So great resource. Found this resource, shout out to Dade County. This is a great categorization or categorizing activity where you would ask students to take those tier 2 vocabulary words and start to think about how you would then use them in your own writing. So another great example of an activity out there that asks students to pull vocabulary from something that they're reading and categorize them into the different kinds of ways that a student would actually use this terminology. And again, the CCR skills are asking students to take really complex texts and not only share what their opinion is, but go based on evidence to respond, whether it be through, written response or in speaking, that they're going based on evidence, based on something that they have read. So not just drawing from their own opinions. When the CCR standards came out not too long ago, they did a whole research across the genres to see, and we're talking about, from poetry inside of your literature classrooms, through your science classrooms, through your reading classrooms, through your CTE and technical classrooms. And what they found at that point was that the texts that you see at the technical level in the career and technical classrooms are by far the most complex for students to understand. So again, tier 3 and tier 2 vocabulary is so important that we're giving students heads up on them, that we're exposing them to this vocabulary early on so that once they do transition over to the career side, the college side, that they're well prepared. And again, you'll see this show up here. So this is an anchor standard for writing, ABE anchor standard for writing. And little by little, it's asking more and more of students and to perform with more and more independence. So most of you know that the TABE 1112, the new TABE, has been approved by NRS. We are in the process of, won't be too long before it is presented and approved by the state, which means that we will be rolling out the new version of the TABE in not too long. Now, the new TABE is aligned to the CCR standards, which will require much more of our students, especially when it comes to critical thinking, reading at much more complex levels, and then responding in writing, clear writing, independently. Now, what we will see go away here at some point are the grade level equivalencies. So where right now we're used to talking about ABE levels, as grade level equivalency 4, 5 through 9, we'll see those go away, and we'll start talking more and more about scale scores and where a student falls with regard to scale scores. So heads up on that if you haven't already heard. The new tape will be coming out soon, and we'll be getting more and more familiar with scale scores versus grade level equivalencies. I think it's also a great opportunity for us to kind of step back from teaching to TABE, teaching what we perceive as levels M, levels D, levels A, versus teaching toward the standards, teaching to the standards that we know will close the gap between the college level, the CTE level, and where they are now. So this is a list that we will share in our resources of words and phrases for top-notch essays. So stay tuned for that inside of our resources. When it comes to persuasive writing or evidence-based writing, these are kinds of stems, sentence stems that we can share with students to help get them started. Students are going to need this not only on your GED tests and not only on your written responses, your short responses and extended responses, but in real life. Our students are going to need to draft letters, not only for job applications, but maybe a letter to their children's school, maybe a letter to their landlord or to their tenants. So we want to make sure that they have the appropriate language to write clearly. So some great sentence starters for you. We'll share that in our resources as well. And just a reminder that in our classes, speaking becomes writing. So in terms of getting students more and more ready for putting pen to paper, for putting fingers on keyboard and to get their essays starting, their writing started, it starts with speaking. So the more comfortable they are speaking in our classes, out of our classes, the more we can show them that that transfers directly into writing. And that does have to do with gradual release. All right, and another way of looking at activities, so more ideas on ways that you can get students together and interacting. So we know a lot of these activities. A lot of this isn't necessarily new to us. So then the question becomes, do we get comfortable in the way that we do things? Do we get comfortable in the way that we teach? A lot of us have a lot going on in our own lives. But I will say that if we leave the classroom on a Tuesday and say that today I left off on page 59, I don't need to do any prep because tomorrow when I come in, I can just pick up on page 60, then we may want to just, pause and take a step back and kind of take a look at and reflect upon where, how we show up in the classroom. Variety is so important. If we are doing something the same way and all the time, that not only is the monotony boring, it may not be pushing our students to where they need to be. So again, I don't mean to stand on a soapbox, but I am excited to see the new tape roll out because I think it'll be a good opportunity for us to start purging, for us to start letting go of some of that, those skills and those worksheets and those handouts and those copies and those books that we've been using forever and ever that are tattered that we're still using, and start fresh. And my advice to everyone would be, before we go and start purchasing a bunch of instructional materials that say that they're aligned and they're aligned, that we take this as an opportunity to stop, to kind of step back and say, hey, I could probably pull something together really interactive and cool and fun that doesn't even need a textbook. So here are some ideas that, ways that we can get students, together and working together. Sometimes it just becomes, give me a menu. I need a menu of ideas so I can pull off of the menu and pull together interactive activities. But variety is so important. If we're doing the same thing over and over again, chances are then we may not even be bored, but our students may be bored too. And it's my opinion that boredom is one of the enemies of learning. So again, you will have lots of resources shared in our resources that get posted in the archives. And I wanted to take a moment to just pull this up because this is one of the templates that was shared in today's archives. If you had a chance to pull it down, great. If not, take the opportunity now to pull it down. This is a tool that I would offer to you as kind of a reflective template. So think of this as kind of overlaying what you're doing in the classroom. This is not to replace your lesson plan. Every district and school has their own version of lesson plans. But really as a way as professionals for us to take a look at where we are, what we do, and overlay this as a reflective piece. So there are categories here that would just kind of ask you, okay, today in your lesson, share some examples. And when I say share, I mean reflect. Talk to yourself, reflect upon some ways that your classroom is safe. So that could be anything like, well, I watched the sarcasm in the classroom. I wasn't sarcastic, or I watched the sarcasm of classmate to classmate. I made sure that any comments that classmates said to one another are always respectful and inclusive and doesn't shut any other classmates down. Sometimes we have that one or two student in the class that always likes to have the floor. Well, are we allowing for other students to speak as well? And when I say other students to speak, I don't mean putting them on the spot, but just making it more comfortable for them to ease their way into the conversation too and have a little bit of the platform as well. Maybe you have music playing in your room. Maybe you go to those lengths. Music is one of the most powerful ways to change a state of mind. Maybe you do have calm music playing in your room, or maybe that's something that is a topic of conversation. Lots of our students, the younger ones especially, come in with earbuds, playing music. Is that something that we're comfortable with? Are we comfortable with our students listening to their music on their own? Is there a place and time for it? When you are not teaching whole group, is there a place and time when they're working independently that they could listen to their own music as long as it's not disturbing others? So you get the idea here. The idea is that we're kind of taking a look at this overlay and reflecting upon how we show up and what our classroom looks like to see whether or not it's an active learning environment. So we would put our CCR standards here, and then maybe specific goals that we want to work on for that segment, that lesson, that day. And then again, reflect on, okay, well, what activities am I using that make input, information coming in, active? How am I allowing my students to be active listeners and readers? What activities do I have set up that allow for them not just to be receptors and passive, but for them to be engaged and participants during this phase of learning? What modalities are activated? What VAKs are being activated? Are they watching a video? Are they reading? Are they speaking through it? Are they actually putting something together? Is it hands-on? Are they categorizing? What multiple intelligences are being enrolled? Is there room for my bodily kinesthetic student? Is there room for my student who is highly intrapersonal and likes to work alone, prefers to work alone, versus my students who are more interpersonal and prefer to work together? How do I make learning active, engaging during the processing process? While new information has been input after they've read or while they're reading, how am I allowing them to process that information in a way that is active and engaging and hands-on and experiential? And the same for output. When they're speaking and writing and presenting, what ways do I allow for them to show up as whole people, as whole learners? What modalities have been pulled in? What VAKs are being enrolled? What multiple intelligences are showing up in this activity? And this is not to say that you have to plan every single activity here. So let me say that again, because it can become daunting if we're thinking, well, my goodness, I have to create a different lesson plan for every single student. That's not the case at all. However, if we provide choices, sometimes just by allowing choices in the way that they're able to demonstrate that they've mastered a skill, just by nature of students choosing different ways, we're allowing for some differentiation. So if we've got a few options that we have set up for students, and maybe they may think of a new way that we didn't necessarily consider of demonstrating or taking information in, demonstrating that they've learned something, that they've mastered a skill, versus the same assessment that we give each time. An assessment does not have to be a paper, pencil, multiple choice essay. There are lots of ways for a student to demonstrate that he or she has mastered a skill, and we want to be able to allow students to use all of their abilities to share that. How am I allowing for gradual independence? What ways do I scaffold that information? What ways do I allow students to work together and then work independently? And again, technology. We didn't talk much about it today, but we did in the first session. We know that our students speak technologies. Some of us are not as comfortable with technology, but what are ways that we can little by little integrate, incorporate more technology, because they need it. They need it not only on the assessments, but the entire world it revolves around technology now. So how are we incorporating that into lessons? And then, of course, I think that once we provide the universal design for learning, provide these kinds of options and opportunities for variety, we've also addressed the needs of our English learners, and in many cases, the needs of our students with special needs. So the more variety that we can provide, the more entry points there are for our students. So this is just a tool that we're offering to you as a way for you to reflect upon your own practice and craft and how you show up in the classroom, and can be interwoven into your lesson plans. It just kind of triggers reminders that these things need to be happening within every lesson, really. Oops, sorry about that. So pulling it all together, these are the things that we talked about in sessions 1 and 2. We talked about our learning environment, students' learning modalities. We talked about English learners and certain ways that we can make vocabulary more accessible to our ELLs, and we know our ELLs are many of our students. We talked about the shifts in the CCR standards. We talked about to some degree, career and technical education and the importance of preparing students for that. We will actually be sharing a webinar pretty soon about preparation for CTE and concurrent enrollment and integrated programs for ESOL, ABE, GED, and the technical programs. So we're excited about that. And we know that it's not enough just to have students in AGE, and on this side we call them pre-college classes, AGE classes to no end. We need to be preparing them for their next steps, and that those next steps hopefully are post-secondary level. And again, we talked about input, process, and output, and the template that we just shared pulls a lot of that together. So at this point, I know we talked a lot about active learning, and I know I did a lot of the talking and you did a lot of passive listening. I apologize. Lots of information to cover in this round, but I assure you, once you get into these resources, I know a lot of this is repetition for you. I know a lot of this is stuff that you already know. It's just good to have another way of looking at it and coming from a brain-based vantage point, understanding the whys and why it's important to have a safe learning environment, why it's important to have our classrooms be active. So at this point, I'd like to open up the floor. If there are any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to jump into the Q&A panel. Any questions, comments? All right, well, we will leave that open, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to connect with us, and we'll get these in, and I can always respond to you personally. Here's my personal information here. So my email address and my direct telephone number, so feel free to reach out at any time. Again, all of these are available to you in the archives. And at this point, we'd like to get your feedback. You know, your input is so important to us, and with regard to the direction that we go with our next webinars and professional development, we'd like to see what you think. So at this point, we want to open the floor up to a very quick 3-question survey, and we'll give you 60 seconds to see the questions pop up on the screen. Please take literally a minute to complete those questions. Thank you very much, and thank you for your comments in the Q&A. If we didn't have an opportunity to answer them here, we will get back to you. Or again, you can email me at my personal email or pick up the phone and call. We so appreciate your time and your attention. We will be looking forward to the new year and what January in 2018 has in store for all of us. So stay tuned, stay in touch. We will continue with Webinar Wednesdays with the new year. And until then, we'd like to wish every single one of you a very, very happy holidays. Thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in.